The envelope smelled like cedar and something colder. Money, maybe, or the particular chill that clings to men who never have to raise their voice to be obeyed. Vesper turned it over once in her hands, feeling the weight of the cash inside, and then she set it down on the scratched laminate of her kitchen table and did not open it for 6 days. She had found it tucked beneath her locker at the end of her shift, fat and cream-colored, her name written on the front in someone else's handwriting, not her name from the employee file. Her full name, Vesper Claudine Marin, the name that lived on her birth certificate and nowhere else in a world that had spent a decade calling her V, or Hey You, or nothing at all. She had worked at Solace for 2 years. Solace was a jazz club and cocktail lounge in the warehouse district that served $30 cocktails and seated 300 on weekend nights, where the lighting was the color of old whiskey and the music was live every Friday and Saturday, and where the waitstaff wore all black, which was the only dress code Vesper had ever actually liked. She was good at her job in the specific way that invisible people are good at their jobs. Perfectly, and without acknowledgement. She moved through the room like something the architecture had planned for. She memorized orders without a notepad, anticipated refills before glasses were empty, knew which tables needed space and which needed warmth, and she did all of it inside a body that had taught her early and brutally that the only safe strategy was to take up as little psychic space as possible while taking up undeniable physical space, and somehow make those two facts coexist without apology. She had gotten very good at the coexistence. She was 28 years old. She wore black trousers with an elastic waistband that sat high on her round stomach, black tunics that fell to mid-thigh and hid the flare of her hips, black flats with thick soles that did not click when she walked. She had dark hair she kept in a low bun so tight it gave her a headache by midnight, and she had a face that was full and soft and that she had spent years learning to walk past mirrors without examining too closely. The envelope sat on her kitchen table for 6 days. On the 7th morning she opened it. There was $4,000 in cash and a folded note that said, simply, "For the inconvenience. Forget it happened. S." She counted the money twice. Then she took out the small blue notebook she kept in her bag, the one she used for everything, grocery lists and shift schedules and the fragments of sentences that occurred to her on the train, and she wrote down everything she remembered about the night she was apparently being paid to forget. It had started with a man sitting alone at table 9. Table 9 was in the back left corner of the main floor, partially screened by a column wrapped in dark-stained wood, and it was the table that Solace reserved for what the floor manager, a nervous man named Derek, called the owner's guests. Vesper had worked at Solace for 2 years and had never once seen the owner. She had heard he existed the way you hear about weather systems, as a force that shaped the conditions of your life without ever appearing in it directly. His name, according to Derek, and also to the liquor license framed behind the bar, was Soren Vale. On the night in question, which was a Thursday in November, Vesper had been given table 9 as part of her section rotation, and she had walked over with her order pad in the pocket of her tunic that she never actually used, and she had found him there. He was the kind of man who made a room reconsider itself. That was the only way she could think to describe it later, writing in her blue notebook with the overhead light making everything flat and honest. He was sitting very still in the way that large predatory things sit still, not because they are resting, but because movement would be an announcement, and announcements are for people who need to be seen. He did not need to be seen. He simply was, tall, even-seated, with shoulders that filled the back of the chair entirely, wearing a black suit so precisely cut it looked like architecture, dark hair swept back from a face of sharp geometry, jaw, cheekbone, brow, and eyes that were so dark she could not find where the iris ended and the pupil began. He had looked at her once when she approached, and the look was the kind that takes inventory without apology. Not a leer, not the sideways glance she was used to from men who couldn't decide if they found her attractive and were embarrassed by the ambiguity. This was a direct, assessing, completely unembarrassed survey that started at her face and moved unhurriedly down and back up again. And when it was finished, he said, "Vesper." Not a question, not a greeting. Her name, stated the way you state a fact you have been holding for a while. She stopped walking. She had not told him her name. Her name tag said V, which was what Derek insisted on because Derek had explained once with elaborate sensitivity. It was cleaner. Vesper was not the kind of name that made people comfortable. Vesper was too much, Derek had said. It takes up too much room. She had not argued. She had gone home and written that down in her blue notebook too, and then she had made dinner and gone to bed. "I didn't tell you my name," she said. "No," he agreed. "I knew it already." He had a voice that belonged to some low register of the world, that most sounds didn't reach, a baritone that she felt in her sternum rather than just her ears. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I know, sit down." She sat down. This was the part she found most alarming when she wrote it in the notebook. Not that she had obeyed, but that obeying had felt like a relief, like setting something down that had been getting heavy. He told her his name, which she already knew, and she told him she knew it, and something in his face shifted in a way she couldn't quite name. Not quite a smile, but a loosening, an acknowledgement. He asked her if she was the one who had caught the inventory discrepancy in the bar receipts 3 months ago and flagged it to Derek without making it formal, and she said yes, and he asked her how she had spotted it, and she explained it the way she always explained things she understood deeply, which was precisely and without apology, and he listened the way almost no one listened to her, which was completely, with his full attention located entirely on her face. She had stayed at table 9 for 11 minutes. She knew because she was tracking her other tables, and she had 7 minutes of buffer before table 12 needed their check. When she stood to go, he said, "I'll be back on Saturday." She had nodded and gone back to work and not thought about it again until the next morning, when she thought about almost nothing else. Saturday was worse, or better. She couldn't decide. He came in at 9:45 and he sat at table 9 again, and he was not alone this time. There were 2 other men with him, both of whom had the look of furniture that could hurt you, large and expressionless and placed with purpose. But when Vesper came to the table, it was only Soren who spoke, and the other 2 men might as well have been decorative. He ordered for all 3 of them the same whiskey she had brought him Thursday, a specific brand she'd had to source from the back shelf. He remembered what she had recommended, which she had forgotten she'd recommended. He had been paying attention on Thursday too. She moved through her section. She came back to 9 when the drinks needed refreshing. She did not hover, which was something she had learned early about powerful people. They hated being hovered over almost as much as they hated being ignored, and the calibration between those 2 points was delicate enough that most service staff got it wrong. Vesper did not get it wrong. She had a gift for the exact right amount of presence. At 10:30, Derek appeared at her elbow, pale and damp around his collar in the way he got when something administrative was happening that he didn't like. "He's asking for you specifically," Derek said, "to close out table 9, just you." "I already have table 9. He made a point of saying it. She went back to 9. The 2 furniture men had disappeared. Soren was alone, his jacket still perfectly placed, his posture unchanged, an empty glass in front of him that she reached across to take and in doing so misjudged the distance in the low light. The column shadow was heavier on Thursday, and the table configuration was slightly different from her muscle memory, and her elbow caught the edge of the glass, sent it sideways, and she grabbed for it, and the grab worked. Glass saved, but her weight shifted on the catch and her momentum pulled the top of her tunic sideways at the neckline, and the wide fabric slid down her shoulder and off it entirely, exposing the heavy curve of her upper arm, the soft full slope where her shoulder met her chest, the entirety of her left side's topography in the amber low light. She yanked it back up immediately. Her face went hot. "I'm so sorry," she said, which was automatic and wrong. She had saved the glass. She had not broken anything. She had nothing to apologize for. But the exposure of her body in a professional context triggered a reflexive shame response that she had never fully unlearned and did not know yet how to want to. "Don't," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention he had brought to Thursday's conversation, the same unashamed directness, but it had shifted in frequency into something that she felt the way she felt his voice, in her chest, beneath language. "Don't apologize for that," he said. "There's nothing to apologize for." She said nothing. The glass was still in her hand. "You are not what you are trying to disappear into," Soren said. His voice had dropped. The room around table 9 was loud with late-night noise, but that sentence reached her with perfect clarity, the way something reaches you when it has been aimed. "I have watched you work this room for 9 months. 9 months, she repeated. "Approximately." "Since March." He said it the way he said everything, like a fact he had simply been waiting for the appropriate moment to produce. "You are the only person in this building who actually sees what's happening in it." She set the glass down on the tray. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "Is that why you sat at my table?" "I requested your section. It took me several weeks to arrange it without Derek understanding why." Something that was almost dryness moved across his face. "Derek is not observant." She almost smiled. "Derek is really not observant." The envelope arrived 6 days later. She spent $4,000 worth of nights not sleeping, and then she wrote everything down. The notebook had belonged to her since she was 19, a habit begun in the accounting program at a state university, where she had put herself through on grants and work study, and the specific stubbornness of someone who has been told once too often that they are unlikely to succeed. She had graduated with honors and a skill set that turned out to be genuinely extraordinary. She did not think of it that way, but her professors had, and 2 employers had, before those companies had decided that Vesper was the kind of asset that made other people uncomfortable and had quietly found reasons to restructure her out. She had landed at Solace because Derek had needed someone fast and had not looked closely at her resume. And she had stayed because the hours suited her night self and because she had discovered, in the particular quality of invisibility that the dim lighting and the physical labor in the black uniform provided, something that felt almost like safety. She was 28 years old and she was very good at staying safe. She was getting tired of it. She put the $4,000 in an envelope of her own, wrote "returned" on the front, and brought it back to Solace on the following Thursday. She put it on Derek's desk with a note that said, "Please give this to Mr. Vale." And then she went out to the floor and started her shift, and she told herself she had done something reasonable and professional and final. Soren walked in at 8:15, which was early for him. He sat at table 9. He placed his returned envelope in the center of the table and he waited. She crossed the room. Her flats made no sound. She stopped at the column and she looked at him and he looked at her, and she could feel the weight of the envelope between them, as a physical thing, a decision made manifest. "You sent it back," he said. "I don't forget on commission," she said. The not quite smile. He gestured to the chair across from him. The same gesture as Thursday, the same quality of command in it, the expectation of compliance as automatic as gravity. She sat down. "I have a problem," he said, "that your particular skill set can solve. It is not a small problem and it is not a safe one. I am going to tell you what it is, and then I am going to let you decide what you want to do. You're going to let me decide, she repeated, tasting the sentence. Yes. People in your position don't usually let people in my position decide things. People in your position, he said, don't usually send back $4,000. His voice dropped, and the drop was not gentleness exactly, but it was the nearest thing to it that his particular register could produce, something rough-edged and warm. Tell me your answer first. I'll tell you the problem after. That's backwards. I know. She thought about the notebook. She thought about 9 months of his attention that she hadn't known was happening, about his voice saying you are not what you are trying to disappear into, about the envelope that smelled like cedar and cold money, and that she had kept sealed for 6 days, because opening it felt like agreeing that the night could be bought, and she had not been willing to agree to that. All right, she said. Tell me the problem. The problem was Felix Crane. Felix Crane was Solace's head of financial operations, which was a title that sounded more dignified than it was. He was 41, thin-wristed, and had worked for the Vale organization for 11 years, which was long enough to have learned exactly where the money moved and where it paused, and he had been using that knowledge for 8 months to skim from 4 separate revenue streams in amounts calibrated precisely to stay below every automated threshold in the monitoring system. He was, in the purely technical sense, very good. He had almost certainly been good enough that no one would have ever caught him, except that he had not counted on Vesper, who was not part of the monitoring system and who had no automated threshold, who had spotted the inventory discrepancy in August, not because she was looking for fraud, but because the numbers in the bar receipts had made a sound in her head like a wrong note, and she had followed it without being asked to, and what she had found she had brought to Derek, not formal, not documented, because she had not been sure what she was seeing, and she had not known who she could trust. Soren had been watching her since March. He had heard about the flag in September, when Derek had finally mentioned it as a footnote in an operational update, and by October he had understood what it meant. He had been building his case against Felix Crane for 2 months, but the financial architecture of what Felix had done was constructed in layers that required a very specific kind of mind to dismantle, and none of the people Soren trusted to dismantle things with their hands had the right mind for this. You need someone who can read the structure, Vesper said. Yes, and document it in a way that can be used. In a way that can be used without implicating the organization's other interests, he said, and the phrasing was careful and deliberate, and she heard exactly what it meant. The other interests being the machinery behind the legitimate front, the thing that made Solace and its $30 cocktails a footnote rather than an enterprise. She had known something like this existed. You did not spend 2 years watching a room this well-resourced and this carefully insulated, without understanding that the insulation was doing work. I need to see everything he touched, she said. That can be arranged. I mean everything. Any account he had access to, every transaction he was adjacent to, every system he logged into. Vesper, her name in his mouth. Again, the fact statement quality of it. Whatever you need. She looked at him across the table. The amber light turned everything the color of amber always turns things. Warmer, softer, slightly less true, slightly more honest. She was a waitress sitting across from a crime boss in a jazz club discussing financial forensics, and she was wearing her elastic waistband trousers and her mid-thigh tunic, and her hair was making her head hurt, and she had just said yes to something that the reasonable part of her was compiling a list of reasons she should not have said yes to, and the most alarming thing about the situation was not the danger. The most alarming thing was that she felt, for the first time in a very long time, entirely visible. All right, she said, show me the numbers. She worked for 6 days in an office on the 4th floor of a building 3 blocks from Solace that Soren's organization used for legitimate accounting, and she worked alone because that was the condition she set. and the condition was met because Soren said so, and what Soren said was the physics of this world, final and unargued. The office had a door she could lock, and a computer she had verified was isolated from external access, and a stack of printed ledgers that smelled like fresh toner, and an underlying mold problem in the building's walls that she became so familiar with she stopped noticing it by day 3. She ate lunch alone at the desk. She worked from 9 in the morning until 7 at night, sometimes later, and on day 4 she found the architecture of what Felix Crane had built, and she understood it the way she understood most things, not as an abstraction but as a physical shape, a three-dimensional thing she could turn in her mind and examine from different angles, and the shape was elegant and deliberate, and she would have admired it if she had not hated it so specifically. He had created a phantom revenue stream in the event booking accounts, mirroring real bookings with fractionally lower declared income, and routing the difference through a vendor account he controlled under a shell company registered in a state with minimal reporting requirements. He had layered 3 additional skims on top of that through the bar's secondary inventory system, the one that tracked private event alcohol separately from floor service. The total over 8 months was $342,000, and he had moved it in increments of $11,000 or less, because $11,000 was the threshold number he had evidently assumed was the ceiling of anyone's attention. He had assumed wrong. On day 6, Vesper assembled the documentation. She built a trace map that began with the earliest transaction and ended with the current balance of the shell account, with every connection annotated and sourced and cross-referenced to the original records, and she wrote a summary in language precise enough to be actionable and clean enough to be undeniable. And then she sat for a moment in the quiet of the locked office with the mold smell and the toner smell, and thought about what she was handing over and to whom. She had made a specific choice at a specific table in a specific light, and she had made it with her eyes open, and she did not regret it, and she was also not naive. She had built one additional document that she had not been asked for. It was a concise summary of the overall revenue picture for Solace's legitimate operations, with a set of observations about the structural vulnerabilities that had allowed Felix's scheme to function, and at the bottom she had written a single sentence. This analysis was conducted by Vesper Claudine Marin, and a copy exists. She had not elaborated on where the copy was or what it covered. She had not needed to. Some sentences are clear precisely because of what they don't explain. She brought the full package to Soren's office on the 4th floor on the evening of day 6, and she sat across from his desk and watched him read it, which took a long time because he read with the same quality of attention he gave everything, total and deliberate, nothing skipped. When he finished, he set the papers down and he looked at her, and he was silent for a moment in the way that powerful people are sometimes silent, not because they are searching for words, but because they are deciding which words to use. "You added a document," he said. "I noted the observation at the bottom. The copy that exists. Yes. You built yourself a dead man's switch." She said nothing. Something moved through his face that she had not seen there before, something that did not fit the architectural precision of his usual expression. It was surprised and something else, something warmer, something that arrived and then was contained before it could fully form. "You protected yourself," he said. "It was not an accusation. Inside my operation." "I protected my work," she said, "and myself. Those are the same thing." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I would not have harmed you." "I know," she said. "That's not why I did it." He was still looking at her. The office light was warm, incandescent, not the fluorescent overhead that turned everyone in it flat and accounted for, and it fell across her face and her shoulders, and the heavy curve of her arms resting on the arms of the chair, and she let it. She was tired. Deeply tired in the particular way that 6 days of intensive, focused work makes you tired. and she was not inclined to hold herself in the usual cautious configuration, the arrangement of limbs designed to minimize, to suggest less volume, to apologize architecturally for existing in this much space. Soren pushed back from his desk. He stood. He crossed to her side of the desk, which was not the move of a man who is processing information from a distance, and he crouched, actually lowered himself, all that height and the black suit and the angular face, brought deliberately to her eye level, and he looked at her from a distance of 2 feet and said, "You are the only person in 11 years who has walked into this organization and immediately built a way out." "That's not a compliment," she said. "No, it is an observation. The compliment is that you are also the only person who turned down the money." He paused. "The compliment is that you sat at that table when I asked you to, and you have not once in this conversation looked at that door." She had not. She noticed that she had not. "Why are you down there?" she said. "Because you have spent a great deal of your life being spoken to from above," he said, "and I am not interested in that." Her chest did something she did not have a category for. "Felix Crane," he said. "What about him?" "He is handled, tonight." Handled meaning, he will not be a problem to anyone. The words were calm and flat, and she chose not to ask them to be anything else. "The money will be recovered. The accounts will be restructured with the vulnerabilities addressed." He looked at her steadily. "Because of you," she breathed out slowly. "And the note I sent back. The note on the returned envelope." "Returned," she said. "You remember the word." "I remember everything you give me." The room was very quiet. Outside the building the city made its sounds, traffic, wind, something distant and mechanical, and inside the office it was the two of them in the warm light and the truth she had been carrying around in her blue notebook for 3 weeks, and something in her chest had been getting progressively less armored since she had sat down, and she could feel the edge of it, the place where the armor ran out and what was underneath it started. "I wrote it all down," she said. "I know. From the beginning, everything I remembered. Because you don't forget on commission," he said. The almost smile was back, but different now, softened at the edges, something in it that she could almost call tender if she were willing to use that word. "What else did you write?" She looked at him for a moment. He was still crouched at her eye level, perfectly balanced, no visible discomfort, entirely at ease at a height the world had not designed for him, and his eyes were on her face with the complete attention that she had been offered 3 times now, and that each time felt like something she had not been given before and could not stop wanting. "I wrote that when you say my name," she said. "It doesn't sound like it takes up too much room." Something in his face, the last remaining geometry of it, the careful angular containment, opened. Not broke, not cracked, opened, the way a door opens when someone finally uses the right key. He reached out, and his hand, large and warm and bare, no gloves she noticed, the bare skin of his hand, found the curve of her jaw, and it rested there with a deliberateness that was not tentative and was not demanding. That was something she did not have a word for until she understood that the word was reverent. "Vesper Claudine Marin," he said. "Yes, you have spent 9 months in this room making yourself invisible." His thumb moved, slowly along the line of her cheekbone. "I have spent 9 months watching you fail." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You are not small," he said. "You are not too much. You have never been either of those things." The hand at her jaw was warm and steady and present, and his voice had dropped into the register that she felt rather than heard. "Everything you have hidden, every single thing you have been taught to hide, I have been watching it, and I want all of it. Without the apology, without the black fabric covering it, without the bun that is giving you a headache." She stared at him. "How do you know about the headache?" You rub the base of your skull at 11:45 every night, he said. I know your timing, your table rotation, your handwriting from the bar flag you left for Derek, the brand of pen you use, the way you hold your tray when your shoulder is tired. The thumb at her jaw stilled. I know you. I have known you for 9 months. I have been waiting for you to let me tell you. She reached up and unpinned the bun. Her hair fell, dark and heavy, and more of it than the tight configuration had suggested, falling past her shoulders, and the headache began to release its grip immediately, and she watched him watch it happen, and the way he watched it was the way she had always, in some private and carefully guarded part of herself, wanted to be watched. The notebook, she said, everything in it. Tell me. It says that you are the first person who has ever made me feel like the subject of a sentence, she said. Not the object, not the thing that happens to, the one it starts with. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he rose, and he brought her up with him, his hands at her elbows and her waist, and then settled at the generous curve of her hips with a certainty that suggested he had mapped this territory in advance and arrived knowing the terrain. And she stood in the warm light of the office that smelled like mold and toner and cedar, and something colder that she now understood was not money but him. And she let herself take up exactly the amount of space she took up, and she did not apologize for any of it. You are mine to protect, he said. Not a question, not a negotiation. The same register as all his declaratives, a fact, stated, something he had been holding until the appropriate moment. Every part of you that you have been told to make smaller, mine. She looked up at him. That's a lot to claim. I know, he said. I have been building up to it for 9 months. The almost smile was full now, for the first time, and it changed his face into something she had not had access to before, something younger and more dangerous and warmer than either. I am a patient man. You paid me $4,000 to forget you, she said. I paid you $4,000, he said, because I panicked, for the first and only time in my adult life. He said it with no self-consciousness whatsoever, just the same fact-stating flatness. I did not handle it well. She laughed. It came out of her completely unguarded and real. Not the professional courtesy laugh she used at work, but her actual laugh. And it filled the warm office, and he watched it happen with an expression she could now name. Not quite a smile, not quite reverence, something that was both. No, she agreed. You didn't. I am better, he said, at other things, such as keeping what is mine, he said, making sure it knows what it is worth, not letting it disappear. His hands at her hips tightened slightly. Not roughly, in the way that something holds on when it is finally holding what it has been reaching for. You are not disappearing again. Do you understand me? Not a question. I understand you, she said. Good. He looked at her for a moment longer, the inventory look but turned inward now, the one that was not assessing but discovering, finding things it already suspected. I am going to have someone bring your things from the locker room, and I am going to take you somewhere that does not smell like Derek's building maintenance problems, and I am going to feed you something that isn't a desk lunch. A pause. And you're going to tell me what else is in the notebook. All of it? Everything you wrote, his voice, the lowest register. I intend to earn every page. She thought about the blue notebook in her bag, with its grocery lists and shift schedules, and the 9 months of fragments she had gathered, without knowing what she was building, what shape she was trying to describe in the dark. She thought about the sentence she had written on the night she had not slept. He said my name like he had always known it was there, waiting. It's a lot of pages, she said. Vesper, her name, the fact of it. I have time. She picked up her bag from the floor by the chair. The notebook was inside it, all its pages, and she did not try to make the bag smaller or carry it differently, or arrange herself for departure in any way that reduced the amount of her that was present in the leaving. She walked out of that office as the subject of the sentence, the one it started with, the one it had always been about, and would be, from here. If this story put something in your chest that you didn't expect, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button and let the algorithm know it happened. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the person no one looked at was the one who changed everything. Subscribe so you're here for the next one, and drop a comment below telling me what you wrote down that you were never supposed to keep. I read every single one.